Okay, so we're here for a Bacardi Tech Talk. Unfortunately, the breeze is a bit light, so the two guys to my right have been kind enough to drag their boats out of the shed which they are working on, and we're going to talk a little bit about setup, guys, mainly to hopefully give the other guys a bit lower down in the fleet a little bit of a leg up or an interest or an idea on what you do during the different wind ranges and settings. So we'll obviously first introduce the guys. Ian, Jensen, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good.
And Paul?
Very good,
Goodison.
very good.
Mate, very frustrating at the moment, but you know, life goes on. So guys, basic setups. How do you, let's start in the 5 to 15 knot range. Your basic setup on your boat, Gooby. What would be your ideology there?
Yeah, you'd be looking at, I'd be looking mainly at the big foil, a standard Exocet foil, and basically the crossover between the big rudder and the small rudders. When you're foiling all the time, I think you're on the small rudder. If you're struggling to foil, then the big rudder's a bit better. And it's obviously a little bit more forgiving if you're struggling to tack. Maybe you hold the big rudder a little longer on.
So that tops out at what, 15 knots, 18 knots? Where is it?
I'm probably off the big rudder in about 8 or 9. And then in the lighter air, I'm with a standard North Sail, the standard VI North Sail, and C-Tech 3B.
And Paul, how does that relate to your setup?
I think the biggest development over the last couple of months have been the introduction of the deck sweeper sails, and almost the biggest thing is where the crossover appears. So under 10 knots, I think you're trying to generate as much power as you can to get up on the foils and then to get around the course, and then as soon as it becomes above 12, 13 knots, it's all about depowering and getting the centre of effort real low, which is where the new deck sweeper sails coming in. And then above that is just trying to get everything flat, reduce the drag, because you don't need the power when it gets that windy. And again, I think Goobs is very similar with the foil crossover. We're on our big foils until up to like the 12, 13, 14 knot range, and then start to think about a crossover. And as soon as you can tack reasonably easily in the lighter stuff, then it's onto the small rudder. Okay,
so speaking about tacking, majority of the fleet can tack. Any advice on how to foil tack?
When I've been out of the class for a little while, which happens quite a lot, and I struggle, I think having a flat platform on the entry, and just if I'm struggling, flat platform on the entry, and really looking at the bow and making sure that you match the turn rate to the heel is an important one. That's the one I always try to remember.
Paul, anything to add on that?
Yeah, again, I think the heel angle is the biggest thing. What I always used to think about back in the laser days is the more heel you have on the boat, the rudder acts more of a lift in the bow and drop in the bow. It's very much the same with the foiling. If you come around a tack and you have too much heel, then you can drop the bow or lift the bow depending on which way you turn. So the flatter the platform, the more forgiving the turn always is. So just basics of just keeping a real nice flat platform. And if there is heel, slow in the turn. If it's flat, you can just whip it through as fast as you like. And if you can get to the other side fast enough.
And do you adjust any strings, kind of bang, anything like that, or just send it as it is?
One of the new features on my boat, I've got an adjustable forestay now, and I've been finding that to get the helm nice and balanced, I'm quite a way back on my rake. So now to get under the boom, I'm often easing a little bit of bang before I start the turn.
Paul?
I generally don't adjust anything before attack unless it's super windy and I've got the vang on super hard, then I'll give it a little ease, but up to 18 knots, there's not really any adjustments.
Okay, so when we're in the higher breeze range, your technique, obviously, you've got to get across quick and everything's going on, but is everything relative in the higher wind range, or we do something completely different?
No, I think it's all relative. It just all happens a lot quicker, and the mistakes you get away with in the light, you don't get away with in the breeze. So you see a few more crashes and stuff like that. But I think all the principles are the same. You just got to your reaction time's got to be a bit quicker.
What about your rake? So say we're going from 15 to marginal boards to small boards, 25 knots like we've seen on the first day. How is your rake / side stay sort of set up in that regard?
Pretty similar, I'd say. The only time I really rake forward is when I'm really struggling to get on the foils. After that, I sort of keep it around about the same. Obviously, Paul touched on it before. as it gets windy, you're trying to drop the centre of effort. So I think my crossover between the standard North and the deck sweep is probably about 12 or 13. And then
So you're playing forestay, going up through the range more than anything.
No, it's different sail.
Different sail, completely different sail, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
completely different setups.
But similar rake, I'd say. My hound sights are all the same between my masts, so that sort of makes it easy.
Paul?
Yeah, I think Goobs touched on that there. The boats seem to like more and more rake, and I think as the rigs are becoming shorter, becoming lower down, it's actually encouraging the boat to have a little bit more rake to go faster in all conditions. And one of the developments that we've been going through with Mike and the guys at Lennon and CST is making the sails shorter leached. So basically you can end up running more rake the whole time, but still have the clearance to get under the boom, which is big. As you get a bit older like me, not like the young pup like Gooby, you need a bit more distance to get under the boom.
You're 40, aren't you?
Cheers.
Yeah.
But I think one of the measurements I always kind of go back to when I get a new sail, new rig, I'm obviously paying a lot of attention to the rake, but one of the biggest things for me is how much room I've got to get under the boom. Like you see here on Gooby's boat that's got the boom attached. If you end up with all the controls on, especially now with the higher wing bars, the gap between the end of the boom and the top of the wing bar gets narrower and narrower. And just as a basic setting I generally have, if I rig up, get everything hammered on hard, and I'm measuring the clearance between the deck and the underside of the boom, I really struggle if it gets less than 62 centimetres, the big clearance gap to get through underneath, and that's kind of one of my limiting factors with the rake. And if I want to start running more rake than that, then I'll ask for a sail with a slightly shorter leach.
So instead of measuring it at the front,
Yeah.
you're measuring your back of your boom to your top of your wing bar.
Yeah, that's for clearance. So in general, it's around 8 degrees of rake, 7 or 8 degrees, give or take 1 or 2, depending on how you're playing
What's
it.
a couple of degrees between friends?
Yeah. But it's more about, for me, it's more about the clearance to keep your boat handling sharp.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about race setup then for those that are playing at home that are only getting into the class, or the guys that sort of have been here for a little while. When you go out on a racetrack, what's the first 3 things you do when you hit the racetrack?
Little upwind, little downwind. Make sure you're able to tack the boat well. Do a few jives, do a few tacks. And then maybe just try and find someone to line up with to get your settings dialed in for the day.
And if you went out there and you lined up with someone you're a bit slow, what's your thought process? You keep pulling strings, or then all of a sudden you're in a world of hurt, or what?
You can always problem solve. That's the good thing about the Moth. There's a lot of adjustments. I've got a little quick pin. I've used the Maguire adjustable spreaders. So I've got little quick pins on my side stays and spreaders and my prodder. It enables me to go and you can change quite a lot with the length of your prodder and the length of your side stays. So I play with that quite a bit. If I feel like I'm a bit staggery, I might shorten the prodder a little bit to flatten out the middle of the sail. If I feel like I'm reaching around in life, then I might lengthen a little bit.
Nice. So you do that a fair bit. Say we've done 4 races like we did the other day, and the conditions were moving a bit. How often would you be changing them?
I didn't at all the other day. I just had my setting and I was okay with it. It seemed like Paul had a bit more of a high mode upwind, and I had a bit more of a faster mode upwind, and I was probably the same height as the rest of the fleet, but a bit quicker, and he was probably the same speed as the rest of the fleet and quite a bit higher. But I was sort of happy where I was, so I left it.
Oh, that's interesting. Paul, do you have a similar setup?
Yeah, I have the same sort of deal with just the adjustable. It's a bit harder to adjust. I don't have the quick pins. I'm always a bit scared of losing them when I adjust. But I think if you've done enough time on the sails and you're comfortable with where it's at, then making smaller changes just on the Bangin Cunningham for me seem to work just as well. If I feel I'm way out, then I'll capsize and have a swim up there and adjust the product.
So, fairly varying things for the same result there, which is interesting. You touched on sails. There seems to be a fair bit of movement in the sail area. We've gone from deep, powerful, now we're going to flat. I heard you before, Paul, talking about the crossovers basically going the other way. Goobs, you're on with the North gear at the moment. Your ideology on your sails?
These are basically just straight out of the box. The deck sweeper will become a production sail basically straight away after this Worlds, and the VI7's been around for a little bit now. I like the material, the polyester 3DI. Seems just a little bit more stable than the 3DL version, the same sail. The biggest thing I've probably noticed this week is, compared to Paul's setup, I think the sails I'm running are maybe a little bit straighter leached, but perhaps a little bit flatter as well, which I think, in my mind, would be quite good for upwind, but maybe Paul's sails might be a little bit better for the downwind. But
Paul, your thoughts on all the sails?
Yeah, no, I think I've been working with Mike a long time now. This is like the 5th or 6th generation we've had from winning the Worlds in Japan. Then we changed the design slightly for Italy last year, and again we've just gone the next step on. They're very, very minor changes. We're talking a couple of mil of seam shape or luff curve here and there, so very oddly noticeable. Probably the change in the prodder length does more than the change in the sail, but we're always trying to evolve and get things better. And I think just from the trend, it seems like, I think Goobs was right there. His sail is very flat and very straight leached, and I think it's probably more optimised for 18 knots plus and the uprange stuff, whereas I was very worried about moving to the deck sweeper with everything coming lower at the loss of performance downwind. So I've almost sacrificed a bit of the performance upwind to make the sail a little bit deeper and more powerful, so that we don't lose out too much downwind. And I think as a package, the sail goes well both up and down, whereas I think maybe the North has some weaknesses downwind.
And these sails are, Goobs says no. These sails are obviously available to everyone. You know, they can just get online and order whether they want a flat one or a deep one. And
if you turn up for the auction tomorrow, I'm sure you can buy whatever.
Yeah, there'll be an auction here. So just quickly back to race setup. We touched on what you do at the start of a race. So I've had some comments during the week that some guys just box the course, one tack, one jibe, one tack, one jibe in these Moths. How do you, on a let's say it's not too shifty, how do you approach a race? Obviously in a smaller fleet it's a bit different to a bigger fleet. But what's your line of thinking there?
Yeah, I guess for me, I just look up the course, and if I have a strong opinion on which side I like, I'll try and win that end and go that way. And if I don't have a strong opinion on which end I like, I'll probably, for the first work at least, until I work out what's going on, I'll just try and have a conservative sort of start and go with the pack. And then that's my sort of low risk strategy. Unless I've got a really defined side that I like in my mind, I'll probably go with the pack that first race until it becomes a bit more clear.
And Moths being Moths, they're not easy to tack. They're not like lasers where you can do 1,000 tacks and cover. So I'm guessing it's all about minimising your tacks and getting up there as quick as you can. Paul, is that how you deal with it?
I think a little bit depends on the conditions. If there are conditions that are a lot easier to manoeuvre than others, like the first day when it's blowing 25 knots, the risk reward of dropping a tack is a couple of 100 metres. Whereas we go sailing in 15 knots, the loss is minimal if you can tack well. So I think that almost defines how much tacking you want to do. But the boats are so amazing how the mode you can go upwind. You can go 19 knots upwind, you can go 13 knots upwind, high and slow. And I think one of the big things for me is moding in the shifts. So if obviously on a nice big lift, you put the bow down, you rip at 19 knots to get the leverage. The shift comes, and you make out big. And I think that's one of the beauties of these boats. Why they're so much fun to race is that there's such an array of angles you can sail and still get to the same place roughly at the same time.
Okay, so you've just dropped your bow from 19 to 13. Any strings you adjust there? Remembering we're trying to tell people how you guys sail these things. So
for me, the biggest control there is the Cunningham. As soon as I want to go fast, I pull the Cunningham as hard as I can and try and develop as much twist as I can. And I think the difference between the sail designs is that my sail is very twisty, so I'm able to twist and then come straight, whereas I feel that the others are more straight, so they have to do more of the work with the sheet rather than with the Cunningham. I think that's the design philosophies that maybe a little different.
Goobs, your thought on that?
I think it's actually quite a good thing that you can get the leech in nice and tight on the North. You can still twist the head with the Cunningham, but for every boat I've sailed, you always want the mid leech nice and high on the upwind. Again, there's other things like the prodder and the mast stiffness, but basically if you want to be twistier and deeper, you just extend your prodder and you don't bang as tight. I think the hardest thing to do on the upwind with most sails is get the mid leech up and the head twisting. I think that's something that the Norths have done really well. So
it's interesting, you're both pretty much as quick as each other, and you're doing things slightly different, which is pretty cool. It's not just the same thing, which is hopefully people out there and people here will take something out of that.
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's more than one way of doing it, and if you are flatter and stiffer mast, you obviously have to use different techniques to if you're deeper and a fuller sail. And I think it's more, rather than having a definite one way of doing things, it's more understanding your equipment and how you change the shape of your equipment to get the most out of it, which is kind of the most important thing.
Speaking of equipment, we did put a thing out online. We have had a couple of questions. We know one from some buffonet in Wanji called Nathan. He wanted to know when you get a set of foils straight from
I
the
thought
manufacturer.
Nathan would want to know how to hike a bit harder. It's probably
Yeah, he's now a super flyer.
to get those chicken legs out the edge of the boat.
Always
more
on
important for
trapeze.
Nathan.
He doesn't have a problem with hair in his eyes, that's for sure.
Still trying to work out how to do the flights as well.
So you just you order a new set of foils. They come delivered. What sort of work do you do on them?
They actually come pretty good from Maguire's. All my foils are fixed tip now, so I've Maguire's have done one of the fixed tips, and I've sent my foils away to another guy in Australia to do the others. But that's the only change I've done. I just it's probably you lose a little bit of control in the waves, but it's probably also a little bit quicker downwind as well when you have control. So I've sort of committed that way, but.
You don't spend countless hours like one Kyle Langford just completely sanding his foils to oblivion.
Honestly, the way they come is pretty good. If anything, before an event, I'll just get a bit of 1500, and it's more cleaning them than anything. Just sand them with 1500 to make sure that they're not nice and smooth and clean, basically. But
yeah, nice. Paul, did you get yours?
Yeah, I think the one thing that people aren't really aware of is how much of a difference the water temperature has on your foil finish. Like I remember years ago spending the afternoon or maybe 3 or 4 days in Simon's workshop down there in Weymouth at Shock Sailing, painting, finishing. We got them up to like 2000 grade and went out in the cold water in Weymouth, and I couldn't get downwind for the rudder stalling. So for me, it's really critical how shiny you go. I turned up here and initially polished to 2000. And then had a little bit of a worry during the Bermuda Nationals that I'd gone too smooth, so then backed it off to 1500. And I think it's just getting a good feel for what water temperature works well with what foil finish.
Interesting indeed. Another question we had was from online was fairings. We've noticed fairings are going on. One guy wanted to know, do they actually do anything, or do they just for show?
They keep Simon in business because he's churning them out now.
And I have noticed, when these guys go from the deck sweepers, you're pretty much stripping them all off. So the end plating, what's the theory and all that?
I think if you do the end plating well, it makes a fair bit of difference. Yeah. The thing that we learnt with the cup was if you have any small sort of gap, you might as well almost not have the end plate at all. But if you can seal it properly, it's a huge gain. The struggle with these sort of boats is with the boom. It's really hard to, if you end plated and it's really efficient down there, you actually want to have a fair bit of depth down the bottom. But with the boom, it's really hard to get the sail to transition nicely over the boom whilst keeping a good amount of depth.
I think the only person that's done it well is probably Benoit, who's done a real nice job of his lower rig. I think we're all kind of scratching our heads trying to figure it out. For me, the windy day when I broke my forestay, I smashed up all my fairings, came in and just in the scramble went out without any of the stuff on because it had all broken. And to be honest, I didn't really notice too much of a difference. I think if it's nice and it's well finished, there is a gain to be had, but I don't think it's the be all and end all. I think it's that extra 0.5%, 1% if you're lucky.
Yeah, concentrate on getting to that level, I guess, then start making Simon Maguire richer, I guess. So, all right, guys, anything you guys want to add before we throw it out to the hungry pack out here? No, all right. Anyone out there in the hungry pack got a question?
Yeah, question for both of you actually. You're both on your light weather rigs today.
Yeah.
What sort of, have you cut the masts down at all on these, or are these the old kind of standard length rigs? Standard heights, I should say.
Compared to where SeaTech were a few years ago, my standard sail rig's 100 mils shorter, and my deck sweeper rig's 200 mils shorter.
And that's very similar for where we've ended up at CST with about 185 or 190 mil lower than the standard for the deck sweeper, and this new sail is probably 50 mil shorter than the Mast I had last year at the Worlds. Right. So very little.
Right, thank you.
So if you're getting into the class and learning, obviously you wouldn't just go straight to and go into all these extremes to the performance gain out of that. Like, what do you think it is? Like massive or minimal, just that 1% type stuff?
For me, I think there's, wherever you make a gain, you also, there's some sort of loss somewhere along the course. Like we've
low
all,
booms.
We've
and
all
all that
brought
sort
the
of
rigs lower to move the centre of effort lower. So there's obviously quite a gain upwind, but then from reducing the centre of effort, there's a small loss downwind in certain conditions. And it's all just trying to realise where you want to optimise for, and understanding that you can't always have 100% gain everywhere. There's always going to be sacrifices, and just moding your boat to where you think you need to be better. I think for maybe some of the bigger guys who are struggling for pace downwind, having the rigs higher is probably a gain. And then for the little small guys like Victor, who chopped his rig down quite a lot in Miami and saw some quite big gains from having that rig lower. So I think it's more about who you are and how you sail than optimising the kit to get the best out of it.
So I'd need a rig about 30 foot in the sky.
I think that would probably do the pillar over.
Thanks, old man. Goobs, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what he's saying. Yeah, I think once you're powered up and you're hiking, a lower rig's probably always going to be quicker. But until that point, maybe not quite as good to foil early, and maybe not quite as good when you're a little bit underpowered downwind.
Sweet. Anyone else out in the pack? Surely someone's got a question for the gurus. You don't often get them.
Just wondering about rig cants and what the crossover is in wind strength for that, and how much you're canting it to leeward and all that. So can you address that?
Yeah. I'm canting more when I'm underpowered. So in the lighter stuff upwind, I cant a little bit, and downwind I cant a bit as well. But as it gets windier, I'll probably be more centered the whole time, with maybe just the leeward side stay a little bit slack. For me, it doesn't feels like the middle of the sail gets deeper as you can to leeward, and in the big breeze, it feels like it sort of traps me into going sort of a high and slow mode upwind.
I think that's the point is what does a canting do for the rig? I think in all the numbers it's always better to be slightly canted, the way the centre of effort works. But I also think that what happens is if you let the rig away from you, actually what happens is the product pulls to windward, and then it ends up pushing the middle of the mast back. So you end up deeper in that midsection. So I think if you're trying to generate power, and it's not a bad thing to try a bit of cant, but as like the breezy days, I was just straight up right, because I feel if you cant too much, the main sheet gets loaded up, the boat gets a lot harder to sail. So I'm always wary when the boat's hard to sail. I try and reduce all the cant completely.
Yeah, that's the other thing. When you're vanging hard and your boom's not quite on centerline, the vang's actually pulling your boom to try and stay on that side. So when you go to tack, there's a lot of resistance in the boom flopping over in the big breeze where you're a little bit sheeted out before the tack. So
makes the boat harder to sail.
Makes the boat a lot harder to sail.
Plenty on, basically. All right. Well, if that's it from the pack, I'll give you two a rest, and thanks very much, guys, for your insight there. It's great. Here, Mr. Simon Maguire, the class builder at this stage.
Yeah,
Simon,
seems like that.
how's things been going?
Yeah, really good. I mean, we've had a really good week. For us, it's great to see our boats here and being raced hard and stuff. We look after our customers pretty well, get everyone back on the water. So since we've been here, we've been helping people set up their foils, angle of attack. When people arrived at the events, they just hammer their foils together, and then maybe they've not considered, you can adjust the angle of attack on your foil. So that's something to kind of people to think about. And then a big thing for us is just like servicing your boats, keeping the control systems, working really well. I still look at boats and people who've got play-in fittings or screws or fixings and stuff. So that's something that people can really kind of like look into and stuff. So.
Keep things nice and tight, I guess. And
yeah. So any small amount of movement, the Moth control system is made up of maybe on our boats maybe like 5 or 6 linkages. So each one of those needs to be kind of addressed and make sure reduce as much play out of it as you can. Sort of thing. So.
And you were telling me before your platform is exactly the same as way back in Garda in 2000 and whatever.
6 years ago.
Yeah,
So-
that far. But one thing that has changed since Garda is the kicker loads that the guys are carrying. There's
Yeah.
talk out there, what, a tonne and a half of load on a little 11-foot boat.
Yeah, it's pretty high. And obviously the rigs get lower, the kicker angle is just, it just gets worse and worse. So we're kind of fighting that a bit with the Moth, just because of the geometry that it is.
So as a builder, how are you staying in front of that?
Yeah, so for us, we're just trying to make the boats obviously stronger. The foredeck area, we just have to kind of make them stronger and stronger as the kicker loads go up. But kind of other areas on the boat, we're kind of pushing reliability is pretty high up there. Weight is a consideration, but reliability, when you're sailing along at nearly 30 knots, the boat's got to stay in one piece, So
Especially when you stop real quick.
yeah.
A question that always seems to be asked is what do boats weigh? A Moth out of your factory, stock standard Moth, what's it weigh?
I mean, we're probably close to 35 kilos now, but again, kind of the feedback you get from guys, we'll take weight out of certain areas of the boat, but we won't, we can't compromise stiffness, the platform of the wings, as I say, the kicker loads and stuff. We need these boats to survive around a course, So yeah, 35 kilos is probably a good number. So.
And the build, mate, you've got how many you got out there now?
I think we've got boat number maybe 94 in the factory, just being finished off for when we get home. So yeah, we're still to make 100. But yeah,
And the 100th boat's going to be that Bangin the Corners boat, which is awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be donated to Bangin the Corners for life. So that's great. Your thoughts on where the class is heading, mate? Building wise, class wise, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I say people probably don't realise, but myself and Kevin, we're always kind of looking at stuff, but the gains are getting so small now that we're having to work almost harder and harder to find the small incremental gains, maybe in foil design or hull design or platform design. So we're always kind of working hard, but maybe some of these things never kind of see the light of day because we looked at them, and the game might not even be big enough to warrant putting it into production. So it's basically making our job harder. So yeah, that's kind of where we're focusing.
So the change up on the higher wing bars, how big of an issue was that build wise for you guys? Your tooling and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, like with all these things, tooling up's not too bad, but we want to be really confident that structurally they're going to hold up. So we'll always make some prototypes, get them tested, almost get them destruction tested, and build up a bit of time before we release them into the kind of general market, which is always the way we kind of operate. So yeah, that's where we've gone with those. But.
All right, well, thanks for your time, Simon. You certainly build beautiful boats, and they seem to last. So, well, there you have it. That's our tech talk. Hopefully somebody got something out of it. And back to the Bacardi bar. See you later.